Good afternoon to the members of the Strive think tank community, and particularly to General Chaturvedi, General Dushyant, as well as Colonel Nilesh and Colonel R.P. Singh, who've been in touch, for inviting me and allowing me this opportunity to share the dais or the panel with such distinguished personalities. Just a minor sort of correction when Colonel Nilesh introduced me. I was with the National Security Council Secretariat for about six odd years and not with the NSAB. Of course, Ambassador Saran was the chairman of the previous board. So it is very appropriate that I must make this minor correction for the larger audience. Also, how I thought I'll approach this particular topic was largely to focus, our discussion has been centered around China's intentions in South Asia and more specifically in these four countries. And what are the implications for us and what then could be the response therein, particularly in regard to the four countries and the larger region. I think it will be very important for us to actually look at or probably emphasize on the larger context of this engagement, increasing engagement of China in not just in Sri Lanka, but in the other countries also. I think there are two dimensions that become very important for our consideration when we assess this. One is that, like any rising power, China, led by a very ambitious, strong leadership in Xi Jinping, it is but natural for them to expand their outreach, particularly in its extended neighborhood. So the point that I want to make is that I think for a more realistic assessment, China's engagements in our neighborhood is not just only connected to either restraining or containing India, but also a natural expansion of its ambitions and its capabilities. And this was established very early during Xi Jinping's reign in 2013, when he had taken over all the three powerful positions in the party, in the country, and the army through the peripheral diplomacy initiative. Where this development, that is the Chinese engagement in South Asia as well as in Sri Lanka, raises concerns, is that our own relationship with China has been historically complicated. The current concern that we have with the asymmetric power structure, especially when it comes to military and financial as well as economic domains, as well as the increasingly competitive aspirational future of both countries. I think both countries, it's very well acknowledged that they have similar problems. There is unequal internal development. There are challenges over energy, food security, environmental security. Both countries have rising global aspirations. So we must place the entire engagement of China with Sri Lanka as well as with other countries within this perspective. The concern is not just, I think, on India's side. While the Chinese may not be very apprehensive about India's capability to challenge them on the military front or on the economic front or on the financial front, I think there is a concern in Chinese strategic circles about India's ability to deter or slow down or complicate China's growing influence, particularly in South Asia and the surrounding region. And I think this concern becomes elevated, particularly on China's Belt and Road Initiative. So the concerns that we see with China's engagements in Sri Lanka or in other countries are all offshoots of these two, this dimension. The second dimension that I would like to focus on is that we must acknowledge that our natural advantage in our immediate neighborhood has somehow withered away, and we could have reinforced more strongly some of our own contributions over the years, particularly to the people in our neighborhood, in the neighborhood countries. Unfortunately, we focused on a strategy with these countries only when challenges appear to have emerged. And this possibly also explains why our focus has predominantly been on the challenges with Pakistan and China over the years. Nepal, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh have all under particular dispensations have visibly enhanced engagement with China. And even though dispensations have changed in these countries, they have not completely abandoned their engagement with China. So even as China is expanding its influence and India is strengthening its deterrence mechanisms, we must also acknowledge that our own smaller neighbors have evolved. And that is very visible in the pragmatic approach that each one of them is displaying today when it comes to India and China. So in this context, one of the first key takeaways that I would like to highlight, and possibly to the leadership of the STRIVE think tank for future discussion, since the country has not been included here, is that if we look at the natural advantage today, possibly Bhutan is the most important neighboring state for us, because I don't think we've still lost that natural advantage. I don't need to emphasize to this educated audience gathering here about Doklam and the importance of China's presence in the Chumbi Valley and the pressure it can put on the Siliguri corridor and on our northeast region. Possibly, Prime Minister Modi's first visit in 2014 to Bhutan was, only reinforced this belief. Within this takeaway, the second point that I'd like to add is we must do more when we have dispensations in power in neighboring countries that are favorable to us. In the present context, Maldives would be one such example, and Bangladesh is another example. And possibly, again, the Prime Minister visiting Maldives twice in the last few years could be an indicator to this approach. Myanmar, as Master Saran has so beautifully put it, has always been under the shadow of the junta. The Chinese have always played a role there. Afghanistan, as Mr. Pant has put it, has a complicated security environment and is not geographically connected with India. While Nepal is geographically, no matter what engagement it has with China, requires engagement with India. So in this context, I would say that Sri Lanka presents the most challenging relationship under the current circumstances for India, particularly with the Rajapaksas coming back to power. And I say this because there was a bit of, I would say, negativity that centered around the Mahinda Rajapaksa's previous, reign and his going away from power, and the Indian involvement in some of the politics, internal politics of Sri Lanka. So considering that both the brothers are back in power, the challenge only accentuates more. When it comes to concerns for us on Sri Lanka specifically, I think China's engagements in this country, and I'm not focusing so much on the projects and on the initiatives that China has taken in Sri Lanka in this particular talk, because that's all out there. General Chaturvedi, for example, has written a very detailed paper on the STRIVE think tank, which I happened to see today morning, which details China's engagements in Sri Lanka. I think the concern for us is Chinese engagements in Sri Lanka when viewed with the broader prism of the Indian Ocean region. Again, the Prime Minister, when he met President Gotabaya Rajapakse, said a stable Sri Lanka is not only in the interest of India, but for the entire Indian Ocean region. From a Chinese perspective, engagement in Sri Lanka, and if I can take the liberty of borrowing the phraseology that Chinese often use, like the 4 comprehensives and the 2 musts and whatnot, I would say the Chinese engagement in Sri Lanka has been driven by 2 realizations. One, of course, is, and again, Ambassador Saran has touched upon this, is the dependence along the vital sea lanes of communication. The second is, along with that significant dependence, is the Chinese realizations that there are vulnerabilities for them along the sea lanes of communication. And again, Ambassador Saran touched upon the geographical choke points. I don't need to reiterate on this. The Chinese response to these two realizations has also been, I would categorize it as two responses. One, of course, post 2008, the plan that the PLA Navy has been gradually increasing in presence in the Indian Ocean region, whether that is through anti-piracy missions, whether that is just escorting merchant vessels carrying humanitarian relief material for international organizations, whether it is deploying for conducting exercises in the region and visiting other countries, whether it's the Chinese naval personnel training and providing support in operating newly acquired platforms in many of the IOR littoral countries, whether it is the plan assisting in evacuating its citizens and other foreign nationals for the first time, in fact, in Libya in 2011, and then in Yemen in 2015. And then, of course, the well-documented Chinese intelligence gathering ships. I think it was Admiral Lamba who, the then Navy chief in 2019, when he said that the Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean, which has been very closely monitored by the Indian Navy, is reckoned to be about 6 to 8 vessels besides the submarines. So one response has been the gradual increase in presence in the IOR itself. And the second has been to diversify the connectivity options through the Belt and Road Initiative. Of course, the land dimension of the Belt and Road Initiative has become complicated, and nothing signifies this more, nothing signifies these concerns better than what the Chinese are currently facing with CPEC and some of the security challenges that exist there. So even in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative, the maritime route becomes extremely vital for the Chinese. And this again overlaps with the vital slots along the Indo-Pacific and the IOR. In this context, I would say the second key takeaway, and possibly this could be discussed later on, is that I think our concerns, especially when it comes to engagement with Sri Lanka, would only increase. What if the Chinese decide to announce the protection of vital slots as a core interest for them? This is perfectly possible because with its enhancing military capabilities as well as its growing economic leverages, China's core interests have continued to expand over the years and also have remained flexible to reflect changing priorities. The Chinese have announced that the safeguarding of the core interests will be firmly on the armed forces. And in this context, their latest military strategy, as well as their the military reforms, speak about creating an efficient military force, particularly in the maritime domain, which focuses on a combination of offshore water defense with open seas protection. And I think very importantly for India, also to prepare to fight a short duration, high intensity regional informatized war. So if the context of Chinese engagement in Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is placed right at the mouth of these vital slots, is enhanced by the Chinese declaring that the protection of the slots is a core interest, I think that will only complicate and elevate the concerns for us in Sri Lanka. The third key takeaway, I think, for the consideration of this audience here, the key question is not anymore about whether China will be a regular factor in our neighborhood. I think that is already answered. The question would be in terms of how do we ensure China is unable to use these resources that they have or the assets that they have or are establishing in all these countries to actually target us. And it is in this context that we will have to engage more proactively and highlight especially our contributions in the past and our historical linkages with our neighbors. it is all there, but it needs to be reinforced, particularly to the people in our neighborhood countries. I'll come to the concluding part by focusing on what could be India's responses, particularly on China's engagements in Sri Lanka. I think it's clearly established that China will remain a factor in Sri Lanka, and India will have to engage with Sri Lanka, particularly on defense cooperation. A start has already been made, and I think it is interesting to note the slight change in diplomatic terminology when President Gotabaya took power in November 2019. He said Sri Lanka would maintain an equidistant foreign policy. And by August 2020, the foreign secretary had said that Sri Lanka would like to remain neutral, but at the same time, adopt an India first foreign policy. This was quickly reciprocated from the Indian side by announcing the Sri Lanka as a priority one defense partner in February 2021. So I see this as a slight progress in terms of Sri Lanka reiterating that India is a very important player and cannot be ignored. The participation of the Indian Air Force and the Air Chief in the recent 70th anniversary celebrations of the Sri Lankan Air Force in March 2021 only reiterates this. And I think India, by engaging, especially at the highest levels, with the new leadership in Sri Lanka, our Foreign Minister Jaishankar visited there in November 2019. President Gotabaya and Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa have both made their first official visits to India. Shri Gopal Bagle is our current ambassador there. He goes straight from the Prime Minister's office, which was his previous assignment. He took over in February 2020. All reflects very clearly India's concerns and priorities when it comes to China's engagements in Sri Lanka. Our NSA visited in November 2020, and the trilateral maritime cooperation with Maldives, which happened last in 2014, was revived, and the maritime security agreement was upgraded to a maritime and security agreement, which encompasses all aspects of trilateral security. And I think now with the Maritime Security Secretariat also being established in Colombo, that gives fair significance to the role that Sri Lanka is expected to play in this trilateral cooperation mechanism. The other thing that we will have to do is, especially I think this is a point that Ambassador Saran mentioned. I think it is going to be very difficult for us to play the game that the Chinese are playing there, especially when it comes to the financial assistance. It's very well documented that Sri Lanka's external debt, especially to China, has been mounting, and this needs to be constantly reinforced in all our engagements with Sri Lanka. It is being done, but it could be done more intensively, and we could encourage Sri Lanka as part of this narrative to diversify its financial borrowings. We have ourselves announced a 450 million line of credit. Just a few days back, 100 million line of credit for solar energy projects has been sanctioned by the Exim Bank. And I think the way to move forward, especially in the financial domain, is to work with other friendly partners on investments. And in this context, of course, our partnership with Japan on the Eastern Container Terminal would be one way to go. At the same time, we must engage with Sri Lanka also on encouraging it to keep China honest, whether that is in terms of the Hambantota port being used only for commercial activities, or whether that is on the Chinese port city project, or even on the hybrid energy renewable project of the islands of Jaffna Peninsula. I think these are all concerns for India. We must keep these firmly on the agenda in our discussions with Sri Lanka and encourage them to keep it firmly on their agenda when they engage with the Chinese. Another area, and I'm winding up in a minute or two. Another area is on fighting terrorism. And as part of this 450 million line of credit, 50 million has been specifically put aside for fighting terrorism I don't think, I mean, the entire plank on which the Rajapaksas have come back to power is on national security. And the Easter Sunday terror attacks that took place in June 2019 has only firmly reaffirmed the challenges that China faces. So, working together with China as part of the defense cooperation, more specifically in fighting terrorism, I don't think it's going to raise any heckles on the Chinese side either, because they themselves have been helping Sri Lanka, especially on equipments. As part of fighting terrorism, it will be useful for India also because of the prolonged ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka to also not only engage with the Tamil leadership there, but to also continue to reiterate to the Sri Lankan leadership on how we need to have a political resolution to this issue. I think that has been our consistent stand on Sri Lanka, and the entire concerns with terrorism, I think, gives an excellent platform for India to continue to push for this. Gotabaya Rajapaksa has expressed some reservation over devolving land and police powers to the provinces. He has reiterated development over power devolution. I think we need to reiterate for development and power devolution in Sri Lanka. And this is where, as part of development, there have been requests, for example, made more recently to build more houses in the north and east provinces, and also to provide assistance for deep sea fishing techniques. In this context, National Security Advisor Doval Sir's meeting with the Tamil National Alliance leader, I think, was significant, and possibly we must continue to move along the same path. Finally, of course, we must engage consistently on key issues for the Sri Lankans. I think there has been some expression of concern on the Quad, and it is important that we must engage with Sri Lanka on what the Quad stands for and what are its objectives. Some of the language that Sri Lanka, especially from some of its official communication, has reflected more or less what the Chinese have been saying about the Quad. And I think this is why we need to engage with Sri Lanka on the Quad. And finally, of course, on the fisheries issue, which is always a slippery issue for India-Sri Lanka relations. There are plenty of platforms that have been established over the years, whether that is the joint working group, whether that is the Fishermen Association level talks. There has also been a proposal more recently from the Sri Lankan side to establish a joint marine resources management authority. We could consider all of this and continue to reiterate, particularly to our fishermen, on not crossing the international maritime boundary and getting into any complications with the Sri Lankan Navy. My final point is that I think the overall engagement of China and Sri Lanka, and also in South Asia, must be viewed from our own bilateral relationship with China. And this is why engaging with China continues to be important, whether we like it or not. And the boundary question continues to be an extremely important factor in our engagement with China. So I would say that we would have to start looking at how can we engage more meaningfully on the boundary question with China as part of the larger engagement with our neighboring countries to ensure that China doesn't use them against us. Thank you.